Cool. Well, welcome to A Bard's Guide to Everything. Um, I am Anthony. I am said bard. At least that's what I've decided to label myself. I'm the type of person that is very much jack of all trades, master of none. And so I kind of dabble in lots of things. If I want more information, I go and seek it out. And so what we as a group have decided to do, and I'll introduce said group in a moment, is to take some time and be able to share some of the things that we've learned in life, in business, and specifically our passion, which is tabletop role-playing games and the publishing industry, that type of thing. To share what we've learned, pass it on to people. Maybe you'll find it helpful. Maybe you'll find it interesting. Maybe you'll find it complete nonsense. But it gives us a chance to talk, which is something else that we all have in common. So the we for today, I have with me Danny Kadashek.
Hello.
And Brian Citroni. And they go by various handles on the interwebs, such as...
well, I'm quite often known as Flat Frog. If you find me in almost any kind of random place, that'll be me. In the D&D world, I tend to be known as D&D with Plumbing or Dungeons with Plumbing, which was my kind of name that I gave myself when I was trying to pick something for Twitter. It was basically trying to pick up on that idea that I really like making adventures and worlds that really feel like they hold together and all the pieces fit.
Yep. And Brian.
And I go by Bjork the Bard, and you'll pretty much anywhere on the internet find me that way. That is the name of my website, where I run a blog where I somewhat regularly post my thoughts, DMing advice, reviews of mechanics, things like that.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm Anthony. I am often found as Epic Blunders, various places on the dumpster fire that we call the interwebs. Together and with a whole slew of other people that are not here today, but may pop in from time to time, we kind of make up this collective that we've been a part of for, I don't know, almost 2 full years now. Maybe a little over 2 years now, calling ourselves Runic Press. So before we dive in, maybe just a quick, just what has life been as a like tabletop publishing collective broadly for you guys? And what does it even maybe mean? Because people are used to, I either do solo projects and do everything on my own, which has its own, good parts, challenges, that type of thing. And then other people are used to big like publishing companies, Wizards of the Coast, Paizo, that type of thing. What is the collective, and what's kind of the idea?
I think for me, the big difference between a collective and a more kind of traditional publishing model is that we all share equal responsibility for the end product. We all work together. The vision is sort of put together collectively. We think about what it is we want. We consider the market. We do all our decision making as a group, and then we work together. We edit each other's work. We examine what we're writing. We make sure it all fits together. So there's a sense of collective responsibility for the whole thing, and that also involves switching roles. Sometimes we'll some of us will be writers and then artists and then editors, or whatever on any particular project. So I guess, that sense of working as a single team. And then of course we have this profit share model on top of that, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, but just the idea that we all have an equal stake in what we're making, and then we share in the profits that we make.
Yeah. Brian, what's it felt like for you?
I think the best way to describe it is you take the, doing everything by yourself as the, I wear many hats. We all wear a variety. I wouldn't say we wear as many hats as somebody who's self-publishing, but a lot of us, like you said, Danny, we all will do different roles. We'll kind of collaborate together on projects, but then we have the benefits of a bigger group or of a bigger setting where we have collaboration and we can bounce ideas off one another and we can make something that, in my opinion, is better than any individual one of us could put out, because we're all working together and we're all putting our heads towards that. And then like you said, we do have that profit share model where anything we do, we have a formula that we handle things, and things are divided up evenly based on work put into it.
Yeah. So we've got tons of topics that we wanted to cover with this new little endeavor. But the first one that I put out a poll, like 20 different topics, and this was one of the ones that everybody jumped on and said, hey, let's talk through this, either from a perspective of I want to learn more about this, so let's talk about it out loud, or I have thoughts, let's share it. So we're going to do a little both, and we're teaching each other, we're growing a little bit more, and for anybody who's listening, you're getting the opportunity to hear on your end, maybe for the first time, new numbers, new statistics, whatever the case is, that might help you make your own decisions on what to do. We're never going to force our ideas on anybody. We realize some of the stuff we're even going to talk about today, related to royalty and point sharing and stuff like that, is either foreign to people or almost to some people sounds like a cop-out idea. And so even in that, we're not necessarily trying to say our model is better. It just happens to be what we've decided to do and what's at least been working for us. And I think even as we talk through it, we may have some flags that make us scratch our head and say, well, maybe in certain circumstances, we got to rethink our own model. And that's okay too. So you guys ready to dive in? I've pulled a whole bunch of numbers, and then so here's what I want to do. The first half of what we're talking about, I want to cover the what the baseline pay structure is. If you go on like freelance rate sites, if you talk to people in the industry, what are people wanting to get paid? What are people expecting to get paid? Because when you look at it in a vacuum, right, it seems like that's reasonable. If I were in that person's shoes, I would want to make that amount of money, right? Do you have any idea? Do you guys just off the top of your head have any idea what some of the going like pay rates are in the industry? Or if you don't have a good going idea of the industry, usually people say the pay rate is about the same as what you would have for a writing a fiction novel. So if your brain is not wrapping your head around the tabletop thing, the same pay structure for a fiction novel. Any ideas?
Well, I've never been paid as a writer in real life, but I have been paid as an editor, because I've worked as a copy editor for non-fiction books, and the answer is not very well. It pays pretty badly.
Yeah.
And of course, what tends to be the case is tends to be paid by the word or by the page rather than by the hour. So you've got this incentive to do it as quickly as you can. At the same time, obviously, you have to do it well. So it's quite hard to get that like any person who's paid by the work done. So so in this particular case, I tend to make, I don't know, I think it's something in the region of $500 for copy editing 500-page book. So yeah, not a lot.
Do you have any idea how that breaks down in terms of per page or per word?
So, well, I would say it feels like about $1 a page if I had to make a guess. Maybe a bit more than that, but
Okay.
not much more than that.
Okay. Any other guesses on? Okay. Well, let's do this. Let's write down the things in the process of publishing a tabletop book that you probably have to find somebody to pay, even if it is just paying yourself for the work that you're doing. Right. That would include what you mentioned editing. So let's actually break down editing. What types of editing do we potentially have?
Copying content.
So we got content editing. That's define content editing for those not
like
in the know.
It's like the mechanic aspect of it. It's kind of the more like, in specifically what we do. We're taking a look at, let's say, for example, we're looking at monsters and we're saying, well, content wise, this looks like it works well, but we need some adjustments to it. While copy editing is more on the the grammar and formatting side of things, and specifically with what we're doing, it's adhering to a specific format for our TTRPG books.
Yeah, Danny, your Bible of copy editing always comes in the form of what?
Well, ultimately, it derives for 5e at least. Ultimately, it derives from the style guide, which Wizards of the Coast published, and it's available on DM's Guild, and that's very handy. It does list literally everything that they use for their house style. In practice, I tend not to look at that. In practice, I will usually look at the books themselves. I'll look for examples of things similar to what we're writing, and then I'll use that as a model. I've also got my own book, which I'll plug it since we're saying it. I wrote a little book called The Copy Editor's Guide to Writing D&D, which basically takes the style guide and compresses it and makes it a little bit more navigable. So I tend to use that for myself as well. But I kind of know it so well now. It's a nightmare, the idea of switching over to the new system, because it's so ingrained in my head, the current system.
And I think the plan is for the next time we sit down and record, we're going to actually go through editing in detail, so we can talk through a lot of that stuff. So let's go back. Content editing here is editing to make sure that there's a cohesion to the story you're telling, that it actually makes sense, that you got whatever was in your brain. Actually, when somebody reads it, it actually reads in a manner that somebody doesn't scratch their head and say, what is this? Right. That's your content. For tabletop games, you do have the mechanics idea. And so making sure that it actually not only makes sense, but plays well and integrates with whatever other mechanics you got. We're using 3 different terms for the same thing. We need to kind of have the cohesion there. That's a decent working thing for content. Some people have a level prior to that. And again, we'll get into more details on editing later, but we need to know at least potentially that we may be paying for this. So we'll at least make a note of this, that there's a developmental editor. A lot of times, if you need somebody to come in and help you flesh out just ideas for what it is you're even doing, some people will actually pay for a developmental editor as well. We have usually far too many cooks in the kitchen already, and everybody has tons of ideas. So like paying somebody on the outside to come in makes no sense for us. So we have, 6 to 10 people that all have tons of ideas. We need somebody that's more of a developmental arbiter, I think, sometimes. But yeah, that is a thing that some people will pay for, is a developmental editor that is different from all the rest. Then you have content editing, then copy editing. For our purposes, and again, we'll go into better detail later, but copy editing for our purposes is making sure that you match your style guide. If it's not one that's a published official thing, Pathfinder uses a very specific formatting. Copy editor should know that, right? 5e uses a very specific formatting, like Danny said, and they're switching it up. So somebody who does copy editing for that is going to have to adapt and know that. And even if you're doing your own tweaks, you need to almost have this internal style guide, in-house style guide for the project. And the copy editor is the one who has to hold that Bible and hold everybody to it. Right. And then theoretically, if you wanted a 4th layer, you pay somebody for proofreading at the end when it's all said and done. And again, that's where we have so many eyes that when we're kind of done, we have everybody look through it one more time, and it's like an all hands on deck proofreading. But theoretically, you could have at least 4 different layers of paying somebody for editing. Prior to editing, what has to be done?
You got to make the stuff.
Yeah. So you got to pay your writers. So that's a layer 1 that I've got written down as writing. You theoretically have up to like 4 different layers for editing, right? What else is going in your book? If you want it to sell, your art. So you got to pay your artists. And then I've got a second entry under art because the interior art isn't going to cost you as much as your cover. Yep.
Yeah.
So I have a separate entry for cover, and then my baby, the thing that comes mostly last in the entire thing is layout, and we'll have to have a conversation on what that means in a second. But those are the things that I have that you absolutely are going to have to fund in some way, right? Even if the funding is, I did it out of the goodness of my heart and did it for free, it's still sort of being funded. What was that, Annie?
I was just going to say, I'll just add to that one more, which is maps, which although obviously they come under the heading of art, they will usually come from different people.
Yeah. So, and the pricing theoretically is different too. So we can talk about that when we get there. There are 3 things that I don't actually have a price point for, but honestly, you probably should include and probably is going to cost you. One is any type of administrative stuff, right? And I've heard from so many people in the tabletop world that I've been a project manager on all of my stuff, and I don't actually get paid for that because there's not enough money left by the time it's all done. And I want to make sure my writers are paid. I want to make sure my artists are paid. And so the person that often spends the most time doing work on the project doesn't actually get paid for that work. But they should. So any type of administrative stuff, we split ours up into like a lead developer that handles things and a project manager that handles things. We can talk about our points share down the road here. But that's one, and that's fairly huge, at least in our world. Like if we don't have a developer and we don't have a project manager, our stuff just sits there and doesn't get done. So to think about the fact that sometimes these people are not even getting paid because the budget's not there is a little weird. Another one that we've talked about and even priced out, but have not ever pulled the trigger on is sensitivity consulting. And they also often charge by the page or by the word. So that's something we can factor in here, but I'm not going to use it in the base numbers because some people use it, some people don't. It's fairly highly recommended in our industry. But again, everything comes at a cost, right? So a lot of times it gets truncated in a lot of people's work. The last thing is regarding the layout. Good layout people don't necessarily just do layout. They're graphic designers. And they will make a big distinction between, no, I actually do a lot of your design work and you are also paying me to do the layout, and they will charge separately for different things. So if you have somebody that's just doing your layout, theoretically, they have gotten all of their art assets, all of their colors, all their styles, everything has been set up for them. And all they're literally doing is dropping things in the right page order and making sure, that it's set up properly. And that's all layout does. Anything else theoretically falls under graphic design. And if you're a good publishing company, you're either paying the same person to do both jobs, or you're paying 2 different people to do that. So I've got design on the side. We won't cover that because I want to go through the numbers here on our last book that officially just got released a couple of days ago. Somebody want to promo the title real fast?
Ramble and Rome's Realms of Wonder.
Yeah. So available on TTRPG. This is not necessarily a sales pitch by any means. But I pulled the numbers on all of that so we can break down and see what do you think, before we actually start looking at any of the numbers, what do you think in theory, and so everybody knows we did a Kickstarter on this, but regardless of how you're actually making the money, if you're paying people up front for the work they're doing, you're going to essentially have a certain dollar amount where you have to at least make that much money before you break even on the project, right? as a traditional company or whatever. So I was curious if we actually paid everybody upfront the normal good going rate for whatever it is that they did, how much money should a project like this, with the exact word count that we have, the exact page count that we have, how much money do we have to have bare minimum before it actually starts to pull a profit? Any idea what that number was for this project?
Are we talking net or gross?
For everybody to get paid per word, per page, whatever, based on the things we just broke down, for you to break even. So I guess that is technically the net,
not the amount we'd need to, not including retail markup and that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to say 7,500.
I would guess $15,000.
Okay. Brian says 7,500. Danny says 15,000. All right. I'm going to task our mathematics tutor to do our number crunching, and we can break this sucker down. I pulled the numbers, and we are over 82,000 words.
Yeah.
So that is worthwhile. I rounded it down to 82,000. We're actually closer to 83, but some of it is, filler stuff, whatever. So 82,000 was easiest. We are at about, and again, I rounded slightly, 190 pages. So that's also worthwhile here. Which the quick and dirty math, if anybody was curious, their average word per page would be 432 words per page. Because some of them have lots and lots of text. Some of them have, it's just an image and no text at all. And we have about, not counting the cover, about 120 pieces of art. So that's our facts about the book. Now let's talk through the writing process. What do you think a typical writer, let's say, should get paid? We won't talk about what they actually are getting paid, but what should they be getting paid?
What is it per word? I had this written down at some point.
Okay, let's say a regular writer can a good writer should be able to do what would be a sensible amount, 5,000 words a day. That's it's doable, isn't it? 5,000 words a day. Let's say you want to be paid a nice $100 a day, so 50 words to the dollar, something like that.
Okay.
So what would that be? 20 cents a word?
20 cents a word. It's somewhere around there. The going rate for a lot of writers is about 5 cents per word. The industry standard that people are trying to say don't ever accept, getting paid less than, is 10 cents per word. I've seen as high as 20 cents per word, but it's super, super rare. And it seems like the average for most people that are doing decently well for themselves, they're paying about 12. So I went with 12 cents per word. So if you have 82,000 words at 12 cents per word, how much are you paying just for writing alone?
That's hang on. I don't know what am I doing there. But honestly, here I am, mathematician. There we go. That's what I want. So that is about just under $10,000.
Yeah, I've got 9,840. Is that right?
Yeah.
So already blew your number right out the window there, just on the writers alone. Now I took out the design developmental editing, and not counting that, and I'm not counting a layer of paying for a proofreader. What do you think the current going rate? And I just checked this afternoon. a lot of people who are saying, hey, hire me to be a TTRPG editor. What is their per word rate that most of them seem to be charging?
Cent?
How much?
A cent a word, maybe?
I'm seeing 10 cents.
Really? Same as the writing. That's really interesting.
It is barely
I'm
under what the writing is.
surprised.
Yeah. Now, we'll come back to this because you'll see in a minute. Like, obviously, you're already realizing the numbers are ballooning immensely. I went and looked up actual freelance again based on fiction stuff. And those numbers are closer to 4 cents per word for content and 3 cents per word, or 3.3 cents per word for copy editing. And that will make a huge difference in the overall thing. But just going with the industry, if you're really paying, you're on Twitter and you see all these people saying everybody should get paid a commensurate amount for their work. Yeah, let's champion all of that stuff, which we're all in favor of, right? What does it actually mean if you do that every layer across the board? So content and copy both at 10 cents per word, which puts you at about 20 total. I'll let you just add those up. At 82,000 words gives you how much for editing alone?
Well, that's about $40,000. Sorry. About $20,000 for editing. Yeah.
Yeah. 10 cents each for content is because 82,000, 10 cents, that's 8,200. 8,200 for copy.
Yeah, the 10,000 was for the 12 cents per word.
Yeah.
Honestly, I am not with it this evening.
So yes, 16,400 just in editing.
Yeah.
Now we get to art. We had on this one, we had 120 pieces of art. Art hugely runs the gamut. You can sometimes get little sketch things for like $35, for $50, whatever. A lot of them that I'm seeing, hey, if I do a landscape, if I do a full, 3/4 page character, it's running upwards of like $150, $200, $250 per image. So I went on like a lower end of the average and set $100 per piece of art. At 120 pieces of art.
Yep.
Is another $12,000. Yeah. So our costs are ballooning, out of control at this point, really. Cover is going to run you anywhere between 500 to 1,000. So I went the low end and just put 500 on there. And Danny, you're right. Technically, if you are commissioning your own piece of like your own map from map makers, that's its own thing. I just work this in as existing art from our book because our map guy was also one of our artists. People charge upwards of like $300 to $350 per commissioned map. But wow. I just work that into the 120. So know that our numbers are basically lowballing across the board. Total for that, 9,840, 8,200, 8,200, 12,500. And then, the last thing, layout is about $5 a page. If you're on the low end and all you're doing is a layout. Again, we will assume that the graphic stuff was done by somebody else for free. That gives you about $950 for the layout person. Which when I was doing it, I was laughing because I was like, oh, if the amount of time that I spent doing layout, for getting $950 when I'm looking at the artist and you're making $12,000, I'm like, man, I'm in the wrong business here. But I totaled that up, $39,690, and that's again not including any admin, for your developmental people, for your project manager, if you're doing any sensitivity stuff, and any design work outside of that, just under $40,000. And so I even broke that down. The cost per word is 50 cents per word. to make the book that we just made, and cost per page $210 per page.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot.
So when you hear
And
that
you haven't
number,
mentioned marketing. You haven't mentioned marketing, which is another huge cost. Which
right? If
I'll
you
talk
end
about.
up paying for your advertising in any regard whatsoever, then yeah, you have so many different additional things. Yeah. It is a mess. So here's my question. How many people in the TTRPG industry are ever going to make that amount of money on a project?
Yeah, never. I mean, one
I have
in
to
1,000.
imagine it's a very small percentage.
Somebody I've been listening to on the Rising Tide podcast thing, which is good. It's been super helpful for me. We talk about it a lot. The Discord. I'd highly recommend anybody listening to pick up on that. They are fairly adamant. Some of the people who have been doing this publishing for a while, especially if it's an indie published thing, and you're actually trying to print your own copies. So this is not exactly 1-to-1 for everybody's project. But I was just hearing again today the reminder that if you're trying to figure out how many copies of your book to print for yourself on a first run, they recommend that very few indie publishers ever sell more than 500 copies of their book. If you're selling something for $20, which I random arbitrary number, maybe you go more, maybe you go less, whatever. 500 copies at $20 each. Gets you $10,000 of the $40,000 that you just spent on the lifetime of your book, which means that you went in the whole $30,000 to make something. Now, if you were part of the writing process, you were part of the editing process, and actually paid yourself, then maybe you kind of sort of start to break even, or at least don't lose as much money. But it's, I don't know. It was just a weird eye-opening thing to me of it's not a sustainable model. And I don't know, outside of large publishing companies like Paizo or Wizards of the Coast, I don't know who can actually sustain that type of model if they're actually paying people what they say that people should be paid. Do you guys have any idea like what the I don't know. I'm flabbergasted when I see the numbers.
I have to assume that, looking at all these numbers, that you probably have a group that, they get together about 3/4 of the talent that they want to have in the book. And more often than not, I'm guessing the people that are more passionate about the book will say, oh, well, I'll take a pay cut on this to get my idea out. And then if they do end up needing to bring somebody from the outside, that's where that person is getting, close to that amount. The people that we see marketing all the time, like, they're like, oh, well, I need a writer, or I need an artist, or, I need a layout person. I think that's where you start paying more. But when you have situations where you have a lot of people working together and a lot of people passionate about it, I think that's the point where people kind of start to make concessions on, the fact that, like, no one person of us is going to be able to, one, make this book, or two, make the amount of money, but I want to make the book and I want to see it out there. So you end up working together with the understanding that you're probably not going to hit the industry standards in terms of payment for what you're doing.
Yeah. I'm with you. I think that has to be the approach with smaller indie groups, especially if you're trying to do something that has any type of legitimate, carry. Our book's almost 200 pages, right? A lot of people who are doing their own indie stuff, it maybe doesn't get more than about 60 pages, right? So your cost doesn't balloon, but at the same time, you can't necessarily charge $20, $30, $50 for the book at that point. So your costs aren't as high. You don't have as much art to fill, that type of thing. And so maybe that's how they're able to kind of sort of turn a profit. Because, if you're half that word count, then you're half that cost, right? Or if you're a quarter that word count, then you're a quarter that cost. But even then, if you're a quarter that, you're still looking at $10,000 for a book, and we just did the numbers. If you're not expected to sell more than 500 copies of your book, you're still going to have to sell it for at least $20. And you're selling $20 for something that, based on page count, is about $50 book. Is somebody going to buy that? And if it's $20, is it a bound, hardbound copy? Because immediately you're losing money on the printing costs. We haven't even, that's another topic for another day, but cost of printing and, even just crowdfunding, kickstarting stuff, how much do you actually make on that versus the number that it says you made, is, again, mind-bogglingly low. Is there any like path forward for this type of thing? Because it feels abysmal, right?
I mean, obviously, the place to save, the place where most people save their money is on editing, which which people will do very little of. So they won't, they won't do the amount that you would get. They won't get as professional a job as you would get if you're paying professional editors 10 cents a word to look at your stuff. So that's a big saving, I think, for indie people. And then obviously these days, it's not surprising that people start eyeing up the AI art option and indeed the AI writing option as a way of getting their content for on the cheap.
Yeah. So I was hoping that would come up organically, because we have tons of internal conversation about it. As a whole, we think that for the most part, the generative art type of stuff is theft. It's piggybacking on the work of good artists. You should find real artists, pay them, that type of stuff. But that said, Danny's right. It is very understandable when people are trying to figure out, I can do the production side myself. I can't afford an artist. What do? I'm turning to something that is cheap or potentially free as a way to cut costs, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to make a profit on this. And so it's a weird thing where we sit in this mindset of we can't afford to do what we're doing, while at the same time championing the cause of the collectivist movement, right? Of everybody deserves to get paid for what they're doing. And it's just, it's been a weird world that I've been sitting in as I've been, mulling over those numbers of how do you reconcile paying everybody what they're worth, not cutting corners, not getting AI to do stuff for you, but at the same time, not, taking out a second mortgage on your house just to get your pet project out the door.
I think for a lot of people, this is, their second job, or you could say part-time job, you could say second job, maybe third job for some people, where it's, this is the passion project. They have a 9 to 5 where they're doing something. And then, in the 5 to 9, that's where they're doing this stuff. So it's their nights and weekends, and they're just kind of hoping that at some point they'll do that one thing that gets big, pulls them in the money where they, break even or, make more than that, and then they can take off, which I think is tough considering, how many creators there are out there nowadays.
Yeah. And of course, the big thing here is that, the work we're doing has no material cost. Well, it has some. We need to buy books, we need to buy computers or whatever, internet connection, but basically it's zero cost. And so the only cost is the labor. So if you're doing it, if you don't mind giving up your labor, if it's time that you maybe you don't consider hard work, whatever, you're doing it in your house. Basically, it's like you say, it's a third, fourth paid hobby essentially, for most of us. So you do the writing in time that would otherwise not be making you money anyway, and so it sort of feels like a bonus. I think that's the thing. If you're trying to do it as your job, like Anthony says, you end up you would end up having to mortgage your house, and it would be a disaster. But if you're doing it as a second thing, as something that's maybe leading you somewhere, you're not sure whether it's going there or not, then actually it doesn't hurt quite as much to be earning any what amounts to $1 an hour or worse.
How how do you pay these people? Given the numbers here, because we're still thinking in our mindset of if you don't make more money on the back end, it's okay. It's just a labor of love and time lost.
Mhm.
But if you're having to pay out of pocket for these people, how are you affording that? Let's take in the world of like crowdfunding, because that's where you get like your bulk cash in this industry. This project we'll round, but this project did decently well, and we can talk about Kickstarter in detail another day. But trust me when I say in the TTRPG world, it did decently well at about $4,000, give or take, on the project. But 4,000 is 10% of what we technically, if we were doing normal pay for normal people, 10% of what we actually would have needed to have already sent out the door prior to even running the Kickstarter, right? So again, we're like, I can live with the idea of, yes, some of this stuff I'm doing myself. Maybe I can cut my costs in half and not pay myself. So now it's a $20,000 project instead of a $40,000 project, because I'm doing, positions X, Y, Z, whatever. But where am I coming up with the $20,000? Even if I'm not paying my people until after the Kickstarter comes in, if the average Kickstarter campaign runs for about $2,000 to $5,000, if it's successful, like where else the money coming from? I still don't understand how the math works.
Well, of course, it doesn't. Is the answer, unless you're doing it on a model like us, where everyone involved is working on the same hobby basis, where we take whatever percentage we can get, but we're not doing it for the money.
Yeah.
But if we don't pay anyone is the answer for us. How anyone else manages it, I don't know. Yeah. So other people seem to do stuff, but I think it's a lot of people working for free. I think most of the time. The only ones who really can afford to pay stuff properly are the very small number who have a large sales base, and they can confidently expect to sell thousands of copies of whatever they put up, or just they'll make a Kickstarter and they know that Kickstarter is going to make $100,000, so they'll be fine, or $1 million. So yeah, those people are fine. But for anyone else, I mean, the vast majority of the indie TTRPG sphere is people working for nothing, as far as I can see.
Yeah. So before I transition, because you're right, I think that's why we have the model that we have, which kind of pushes all this a little bit to the side, not necessarily sidesteps it, but tries to deftly handle it in some way. Why do you think the industry is still like pushing both sides of this, right? That you have to pay people what they're worth, which we're all in favor of, but also like there's no way that you can actually make this amount of money. Like, is there a thing that we can do as a group or as individuals, or when we're talking to people, is there anything we can do to kind of try to shift the conversation to the eye-opening numbers that we're just looking and saying, great, it sounds awesome when you talk about it in a vacuum, but it's not doable. So what is the actual solution? Or is it just that whenever it comes up, we just have to say, look, running the numbers, it's not a sustainable model. So let's talk real numbers instead of fake ones. Is that really the approach?
I think ultimately it's that you need to kind of say, like, in a perfect world, I would pay you this much, but I'm not going to, this project is probably not going to make this much. If the project makes this much or more, I would happily pay you what you're worth or more. But, the reality, like you said, the reality of the project is probably not going to break even based on industry standards. So, you run into a situation where you either, say, well, this will never be profitable, so I'm not going to do it. Or you say, I'm going to kind of acknowledge that, I'm not going to get paid what the industry standard is for this for somebody that, is doing this as their 9 to 5 job, for lack of a better term. And, we'll just divide up things the way that, we'll take what we earn and we'll just split it up amongst ourselves. And we'll just be happy with that. And the fact that, we all got to work together on something that we're passionate about.
Yeah. I think what we, at least when I'm looking at conversations and participating in conversations moving forward, maybe my own personal action points are to point out the difference to people when you're saying, here's my hiring rate, charge X amount per word or per hour or per dollar. There's a huge difference if you're getting signed on to somebody's side project that they just need some help with than if you're trying to get hired by Wizards, right? It is perfectly okay to get paid above and beyond industry standard if you're getting hired by a corporation that can afford it, right? They have a completely separate marketing team. They're going to sell more than those 500 copies. They're going to sell, 50,000 copies. It is perfectly fine. But when somebody is looking to, be lucky to sell 100 copies of a project, you might actually be price gouging them out into oblivion, or for enough that they're going to say, well, I guess I'll put it out without an editor. Newsflash, bad idea. I guess I'll go, I can't afford an artist. The artists are pricing themselves out. So I guess I'll go and use Midjourney or one of the other generative art things because that's the only thing I can afford. Right. And so I feel like to some degree, we need to have these hard conversations with people in the industry and say, you're actually contributing in some way to the oversimplification of our own projects, right? And making projects actually come out worse because we may be gouging people who otherwise would have good stuff. And on the back end, you might be able to make more money off of this. I don't know. It's making me definitely see you have to approach corporate work different from individual work, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Especially with the bigger corporations out there that, like you said, they have the diversity, they have, specific departments to handle everything. And they already have kind of, they have proof of profit most of the time that, we've put out the thing will make the money. We've got a team that will confirm that our next thing that we're working on, the next idea, that the developers have brought to us, we see that this will work. We see that this will most likely make a profit. We're going to throw these corrections in there and send it back and get it working. That's a situation where, and I almost think that's where a lot of the industry standards have come from, or they have to have come from is, a lot of these bigger companies that, they know they're going to make money and they're basing it off of, assuming that they're making something that's making X amount of money.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So what some people are willing to do, and they'll even tell you when you're having these conversations, if people can't afford that, then it's perfectly okay to do a small per word rate and also a royalty. Like you can take a small bit of the proceeds as well. And they almost list that as a concession of, it's not a terrible idea, especially if you're basically wanting to throw the author a bone. That's kind of how it's usually worded. The issue with doing a both and, although I still think that's probably a decent approach, the issue with doing a both and is even if you decide I'm going to cut my rate in half, you're still looking at, again, I'll use our numbers, still looking at about a $40,000 thing now reduced to a $20,000 thing. And on Kickstarter, that doesn't change how much money it makes. So you're still on a $4,000 Kickstarter. Now you've basically said, I'll take half of the amount of money. And in addition to that, I'll take whatever proceeds that it makes. Well, it just lost $36,000 or $16,000. It's not going to make any proceeds anytime soon. It's got to recoup all of its losses, right? Or the other person is just going to be out $16,000 and you'll still start making money on additional sales, whatever the case is. So you're gouging them twice at that point. It's so our model that we've done from the very beginning. And it was predicated on the idea that nobody's really in charge of this. Nobody has the excess funds to be able to front something like this. But we all thought that we could make something cooler together than on our own, was to steal essentially an idea from the music industry. That's one of my backgrounds. My degree is in recording engineering. And so I was like, oh, the music publishing thing actually kind of has this right. Now we can talk about publishers and studios and price gouging there all we want and not getting the artists what they deserve. But they have a model for movies and for music where you assign points based on the amount of work done. Sometimes it's just because, this person helped with the project, so we'll give them some credits for points or whatever. But if you're doing it right, it is kind of a point-based system that is commensurate to whatever work that you've done, right? So we developed a system for that with ours to allow us to properly split up the actual royalty as opposed to the and the potential royalty, as opposed to having money coming out of pocket that nobody actually has available to pay people. You guys know, because I do all that on the back end. I've got a Google sheet for all that sort of stuff, and we tweak it kind of per project a little bit, but for the most part, it's stayed the same since our very first project. Do you have any idea kind of roundabout where we have breakdowns for writing, for editing, for different stuff like that? Do you know off the top of your head how those breakdowns list for us?
From memory, I think writing and editing are more or less the same. In fact, I think it goes evenly between writing, editing, art, and then there's additional production points which are sort of added on top.
Yeah, I think
that feels right.
A lot of it, the writing has a slight edge. Editing for a while we had on par with writing, but that was also when we had the project management and a lot of the admin stuff lumped in with the editing. We've separated that out now. So editing is a little lower now. And then art, depending on the size of the project and how many pieces of art we've got, that balloons a little bit between like 12 and 20% roundabout. I did the quick and dirty math on if we were to do the per word per art piece count thing. And I think I did the math right on this. The writing cost would have been about 25% of the cost. The editing, which again, I think the 10 cents for each layer of editing is ridiculous. So that alone probably should industry-wide come down to what it should be, which is around 3 to 5 cents. But keeping it at 10 and 10, that's about 40%. If you cut that in half, which is probably more closer to what it should be, then you're still at about 20% on the editing. So again, that's probably pretty close to where our editing is on the 20% side of things. Writing is actually significantly lower. So our writers actually get a lot more for what they're doing. And art is probably about 30% based on what this is. And again, our estimates were low on when we were doing the numbers. So that's just a comparison on what we do versus what the industry does. That may be worth having a conversation on reallocating those numbers down the road. But we also specifically in the last couple of projects have allocated just a flat 5% for layout, a flat 5% for the project manager, a flat 5% for the lead developer, the person who kind of is carrying the vision of the whole thing and saying, hey, that fits, that doesn't fit, that type of thing. And then if we've done a Kickstarter, then I've got 5% actually allocated to the main person or persons that are running the Kickstarter campaign, as that's an extra layer of hassle. Right, Brian?
Yeah.
Brian had to do the last one, or volunteered to do the last one. I don't know if he'll ever want to do it again. But no, that's been worked into the pricing system. But yeah, so we use points to allocate there. And so of all of the different, I think off the top of my head, are if you make a monster, it counts as half of a point. If you make a spell, it counts as a quarter of a point, right? Different things like that. If you're doing a larger entry, Realms of Wonder had a number of, realms, a number of different like locations, and they were, 5 to 10 page entries on stuff. And so we allocated closer to 2 or 3 points, I think, on each of those for the writing credit.
3.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's 3. And then a couple of them had some extra adventures, encounters kind of built on. Those counted as more. Subclasses used to be 2. I think it's down to 1.5 or 1, something like that now. So yeah, we have a point system there. And so everything always then adds up to 100% of all the writing credits. So when you have more writing, you have more spread out to everybody, but still you have an equal proportion based on the amount of work that was done. Same thing with the editing. If we have multiple people doing the editing, you have more hands, which means theoretically, at least, it should take less time. And so more people are getting a little bit of the editing credits, where on some projects, if one person is just the sole editor, content or copy or whatever, they get all of that allocated. So that affects things. Art, same way. The number of art, the size of the art, I kind of allocate different points for each of those art things, and it goes toward the pool of the total art percent. At the end of the day, if you're not afraid to say some numbers on this particular project, how much did you actually end up pulling down, or at least what percent? Do you remember? I can at least say mine, even if you guys don't want.
I think I'm on about.
I think.
If we're talking about percent of the total income,
yeah.
I think we're about 6%. Am I right? Maybe a bit less, 5%.
Let's see, Danny. You ended up taking on the bulk of project management and most of the lead editing stuff. So you ended up with by far the most on that one. You landed at about 18. A little under 18.5%.
Oh, more than I remembered. Wow. Okay.
Brian.
What did I end up with?
10.27% of the total.
Sounds about right.
And I was at 11.66. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of us. 8 of us that were hovering right around between 9 and 12%. Danny had the 18, and we had one other contributor that just did a couple pieces of art, so it was sitting a little under 3%. But that's that. How many people is that? Let's see, 9 people working on the project. And everybody landed somewhere between 3 and 19% of the total project. When you look at the numbers like that, like it has anybody ever really, and usually they would talk to me because I got to change it. So I'll say, I've never heard anybody complain about. Has anybody complained, or you guys grumbled about? I don't, feel like this was.
No, I think the point system has always worked surprisingly well. I think we've always, everyone tends to look at their percent and go, yeah, that feels about right. Yeah. It does tend to feel like, I did about that percentage of the work. And, and it's they're all low numbers because there's a lot of us. So they're all going to be low numbers, but they're still, when you consider how many people working on it, you go, yeah, that's about right. It's like in this case, we've got 9 people. So basically you want a little, on average, you were going to get a little over 10% each. And then you think, well, yeah, and then these people did a bit more than average and these people did a bit less than average. So that feels, appropriate.
Yeah. I'm curious here. So this is not a demoralizing thing. This is a, can we extrapolate from the numbers whether if this had sold well, if this had sold what it needed to break even, right? The 39,690 from the other numbers we were doing, right? If it had actually for some reason blown up on Kickstarter and done that well, Danny, your 18, little under 18.5%, would have translated to about $7,318.
Yeah.
And again, when you look at, you contributed to some of the writing. The writing was would have been a little under 10,000. You contributed to a decent chunk of the editing, but not all the editing. 7,000 actually sits right about probably where it needed to have been, especially if we're not counting in this cost the admin of project management stuff.
Yeah,
7,000 seems about right in this one. So it's weird that, like, I don't know. I guess I'm coming around to again, not really trying to force people to do this shared revenue model, but if your numbers are actually done right and you're being honest with each other, we may not ever have a project hit $40,000, but if our revenue share is getting us to the point where it is distributed in a way that it seems like it's pretty much, if it actually hit that number, you would have gotten paid about the same, if not more. Ideally, you would have potentially gotten more. Then I still feel good about this royalty sharing stuff. We've said all along that if everybody is going to rise and fall with the success of a project, that means everybody's got skin in the game on promoting the project. Everybody, because you want it to do well. If you're an author, you're a freelance or whatever, you wrote 100 words for a piece, you got paid. You really, let's be honest, you don't necessarily care if the book does well or not because you already got paid. Right. You don't really, it's fine. Right. It could be good. It could be bad. It doesn't necessarily matter to you because you're not going to get paid any more for it. So I don't know. I like that our model builds in the expectation that if you want to get paid more, part of the ways that you get paid more is to help promote it in any way possible. And I think that adds that extra incentive, and is at least to me has brought us a little bit closer as a group. Right, because we actually have a vested interest in everything that's going on with the group, no matter how much or how little I've contributed to the project.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions? Because I've done plenty of number pooling, whatever, and we can talk about it in general on royalties, whether like our splits, numbers on ours, if you think there's anything worth talking through there, or just in general about like rates of pay in the industry, or any type of conclusions you've come to as a result of this.
I mean, one thing I would say is, we worked on this project for something close to 5 months in the end. It was quite a long one for us. It was probably the longest one we worked on. And so obviously it wasn't a full-time job for any of us, but nevertheless, I'm looking at $7,500. I'm going, even if I earned that, it still would be quite low for the amount of work we did. So it does sort of show how even then the rates, even the rates of pay you've been quoting this whole time, still are quite low. It's quite hard. It is hard work, and if you want to make it as a writer in this space, even professionally, you have to write a lot.
Yeah.
You have to write fast. It's definitely not. It's not an easy game to become successful in, I think. But yes, I agree with you. I think this mode of work has always felt very fair. It sort of feels obvious. There's an obvious sort of, well, yeah, of course we're going to work. If we're going to work as a group, that's how you do it, surely. And yeah, but it's been surprising how many people are reluctant to take on that approach, especially artists. I think generally writers. I think writers are a bit more used to this sort of model, because if you're a writer, not in a writing for hire kind of by the word way, but if you're a writer writing a novel, then that's how you work, right? You get royalties. You might get an advance, but the advance is just against your royalties. So ultimately, you're being paid by how well the book does. So you do, again, have a vested interest in how the book works. So I think writers are a little bit more open to that approach because it sort of fits into a more familiar model for writers. in a way I think artists just are very suspicious of it for obvious reasons, because artists do get messed with a lot. But I think as soon as that percentage basis conversation comes up, most artists go, thanks, but no thanks. So if we could persuade more people to do it, it would be nice.
I think the other thing that comes in with artists, as I know, especially in our space, the TTRPG space, artists have many other ways that they can make money. A lot of which are much more easily done up front. Because I know a lot of the artists that would respond to whenever we would put a call out and say, we're looking for artists. This is the kind of book we're doing. If this is the thing you do, a lot of the people that would show interest, if you go and you look at their profile, look at their portfolio, they do a lot of they'll do commissions for individual players or for groups. And a lot of that is that seems to be pretty solid money with them. And when you compare it to something that we're offering, I completely understand when, that with, doing a character portrait or a group portrait, that there's a deposit that they get up front and then they get the rest of the money when it's completed. That I'm sure feels like a more profitable way for them to go.
It's true, although I imagine that a lot of that work has gone to AI now. I think a lot of people who previously might have commissioned an artist to give them a character drawing are going to be eyeing up Midjourney and going, I could put a few prompts into there and I could get a really nice picture that I don't care if it has more fingers than it should. I'm only using it for my own benefit. So why not?
Yeah, I think that's maybe a cautionary tale for the artists of know your audience and don't price yourself out of the market. Would you rather get paid, $50 instead of $65 for this thing, and maybe not stick to your principles and not make $15, or would you rather not get the sale and know there's another generative art piece out there instead? Again, I'm not advocating for it, but I know that is a pretty heavy argument that people have.
But on the flip side, ultimately the amount of time it takes to create that artwork hasn't changed. So if as you lower those prices to try and compete, you're lowering your income on your time.
Yeah,
it's a hard thing because as we've learned with the royalty thing, when we add more people into a project, the pie doesn't get, you can only have 100% of a pie, right? And the same thing is always going to be true when it comes to funds of any sort. If you start charging more, you want to pay your people more, the shipping costs, the creation costs gets balloon. Where is all that extra money coming from? Well, the one thing the industry really hasn't adapted to yet is charging more for their projects. And I think we're just going to have to at some point, and the buyers are going to have to adjust. But then you get into the same argument that you have with, fast food or grocery store people, right? Of the buyers are just going to have to adjust because we have all these extra costs of paying our labor, paying for the shipping and stuff like that. And I think the TTRPG world is one that tends to lean pretty heavily left, I would say. And so the idea of charging more, we immediately think, oh, that's corporate greed. But at the same time, we say we want to pay our people more, and you're like, yes, power to the people. Where's the money coming from? Unless you're actually willing to charge more for the projects. It'll be interesting to see how this shakes out, because the money pot is not getting larger, despite the fact that the allocation going out seems to be. I'll be curious to see how this plays out in the next couple of months, years. We're into hardbound books costing $60 now for a good D&D Paizo type book, but I don't know that anybody in the indie industry, people doing stuff on Kickstarter are necessarily at the point of charging, routinely charging $60 for their books. And maybe we need to in order to actually just make ends meet.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's probably for us too. Like we do mostly digital, right? But we've been sticking it around $20, and this one we finally raised it to 25. But we're hesitant because we're afraid, are people not going to buy it because we're raising the cost, instead of being concerned about, are we actually going to go in the hole and go, out of business as a collective? That's impossible to do, but you know what I mean? Because we're not able to actually recoup the cost, of even the time investment here. So probably a good lesson looking at these numbers of, probably our own value. If we're $210 per page, right, of production value here, we probably should price our books accordingly. So maybe something for us to learn and keep in mind the next time we have a little sit down with the rest of the crew.
Yeah.
Cool. Any parting shots? Last thoughts before we shut her down for today?
Next time we have to do this a little bit earlier because it's
sleepy time in the UK.
It's late over here in the UK. That's all I can say. And I didn't know there was going to be a test. But you just threw that at me.
Well, I had a calculator open on my screen. I assumed you were going to do that. You were. Oh, I thought you were doing pencil and paper over there. I was like, man, Dan is going hard.
I was just typing the wrong numbers in. I was hopeless.
Well, now we know. I will not allow you to lean into your skill set next time.
Well, yeah, no, just yeah, it's not great because if people are looking at this going, can this person tutor my child? They're going to be coming back going, hell no.
I swear I can do better.
I promise I can do it.
Give me numbers. Give me numbers to multiply.
Anything involving numbers, especially if those numbers have pound signs or dollar signs in front of them. All my mathematical skills go out the window at that moment. It's like, oh no, it's money. It's real things.
I can deal with irrational numbers, but nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. It's got an I in front. If it's I, then I can deal with that. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, fellas. We can have some more internal conversations, and hopefully we'll have another one of these recorded chats sometime soon.
Yeah.
See you all.
Till next time. See ya.
Bye-bye.